sunshine. Anyway, welcome. We are excited to have Mayor Phil Clark with us today. I can't believe it's winding down. Next week is our last program, and that's me, yours truly. And I'm excited about it. I have a couple fun things in store, so the program may be a little bit different, not just speaking. But anyway, enough of that. Phil has been a resident of Elizabethtown. I think you were born here, right?
Just about.
And he loves history. He loves Elizabethtown. And we thank you for your service, too, all you've done. He was president of the Elizabethtown Preservation Associates. He has stepped down now. He is a board member, and that's what we are. We're the Elizabethtown Preservation Associates, and we do business as the Winter Heritage House Museum, which houses the two log cabins and the ancient coal house that you're in right
I can change.
So it was great to have him serve as president, but we look forward to him serving as mayor of the town. Anyway, he has a wonderful program in store for you, and I think I'll just leave it at that, and you can get started.
Well,
okay?
We can, when we're all finished, we'll decide if it was a great program or not.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Terry. I always like to know, before I start, like the people that are in the room, are most of you, obviously I think are all Elizabethtown residents, like longtime residents? Like to be a native, you gotta be here at least 75 years, I think. No. Because I'll be referencing some of the buildings and things that are current, and just so I know, that hopefully you'll be on board with where I'm at, like what I'm talking about. When Terry first asked me to do this, I wasn't sure if she wanted like my life in Elizabethtown or just life in Elizabethtown in general. So what I did was I'm going to talk about some of the early history and try to bring it up to things that I remember then and up to the current date. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to holler or raise your hand or do whatever. I'd be happy to answer questions. And maybe at the end, if you have anything to wrap it up, we can take some questions then too. Elizabethtown was actually founded in the 1700s, but unlike a lot of towns, we don't have a founding date or a settling date, at least one that's been established or confirmed. We generally take the dates in the 1740s, I've seen dates from 1743 to 1747, that those are somewhere in there we were founded. Then there are some that say, well, no, it wasn't until Barnabas Hughes sold the first deed, so that was like 1760s. But what the date that I like to use is for at least our, let's say the founding date for Elizabethtown is 1745. And 1745 is the date that Thomas Harris built his Indian trading post and tavern on South Market Street. And that's kind of where we're gonna start. And is everyone familiar with where that would be? Local residents knew it as the Farmers Mutual Building, okay? The picture we have here is that building about the turn of the late 1880s, I think is the picture we have here. That's another view of it. That was the very late 1800s, that's what it looked like. And I don't know if you can see from this picture, but there are some relatively modern buildings in the background, even though this building is built in 1745. The buildings around it, if you look, are more like early 1900s. That's what that building looked like before it was renovated to what we see today. There's another view of it. The front of the building is to the left, and the portion in the foreground is actually facing Market Street. So kind of get your bearings there. Even though it's known as 56 North Market, the front of it, the actual front door of that tavern and of the building was facing the Conoy Creek, okay? And this, I don't know if we can we zoom in on that or not? Is that something we could? That little black dot up near up under the eaves.
Point it to me.
Right there, can we?
Oh, just a second.
Anyway,
There.
yeah, that is the original date stone for that building. And the interesting part is, the building was built in 1745, and it was used as a tavern, like I said, up until a little beyond the mid-1800s. And then it was used mostly for residential. There was apartments in there. And it continued to decline. I mean, the appearance of it was going downhill. And in 1912, Veer Treichler, who was a physician in town, whose father was Abram Treichler, and if you're familiar with the Masonic Lodge out here, Abram C. Treichler is the person that lodge was named after. He was a physician, and his son, Veer. So Veer bought this building in 1912, and it was in bad shape. What I was going to say is, in the course of his renovations, they uncovered this date stone up at the top, and it has the initials for Thomas Harris, who was the person who built it, and the date 1745 is in there. Anyway, let me back to there. The building was in really bad shape when he bought it. In fact, it was a mess. He took out or gutted the insides and just repointed all the stonework, and then they had stuccoed the entire building to the appearance it has today. And I'm going to jump forward here if I can. I think that one picture may be out of. We lost some pictures there. Anyway, the building was renovated between 1912 and 1915. And for many years, he had a physician's office there. The Treichlers lived on the second floor, and they had physician's offices on the first floor. And it was that way up through the 1950s. And when the Treichlers, Veer Treichler passed away and his wife passed away, I think in the late 50s, the house was, the old tavern was willed to Mrs. Treichler's sister and her husband. They lived in Philadelphia. So they moved up, took up residence there, but they really wanted to sell this old building. They didn't plan on living there for long. So the first thing they did was they offered it to Elizabethtown Borough, thinking the borough might want to put their municipal offices in there, because at that time, the offices were actually across the street. There's a little residence now right across the street from this building. And that's where the borough offices were. So they figured, well, maybe they'll want to buy this building and move in. They offered it to them for $40,000. And at that time, the borough figured that $40,000 was way too much for this building. So they turned it down, and it got sold a year later for $30,000 to the Farmers Mutual Insurance Company. And Farmers Mutual did a good job in maintaining it and trying to keep it the way it looked when Veer Treichler had renovated it. So they maintained it. They were there from early 1961 through the early 2000s. And then it changed hands a few times. And finally, Elizabethtown Borough bought the building for considerably more than $40,000. It was actually a little over $300,000. So the borough owns the building. The original intent for that old tavern was to move the municipal offices from where they are on South Hanover Street to this location. What happened was the pandemic came around, revenue was down, so it was felt that it wasn't the time to renovate it. It would have been meant a tax increase at the very least. So it kept getting put on the back burner. Right now, they're having discussions with various groups to decide what use this building could be put to. But hopefully, before too long, we'll see the old Bear Tavern brought back to some useful purpose in Elizabethtown, whether it's for municipal offices or for some other community-type organization. So we're looking forward to that. what I was going to say also is that the community, like all small towns in the area, we started out as an agricultural community. And the businesses, obviously, that we had reflected that. One of the big businesses we had that did not only local business, but also throughout the country was Book. It was A. Book and Sons. I don't know if you've heard of Book and Sons or Book's Foundry. They did a lot of agricultural implements, wheelbarrows, anything had to do with farming or agricultural. They made cast iron troughs. And they shipped those all over the country. It wasn't just a local E-Town business. It was something that they shipped nationwide. And in fact, even up into the 50s, their things that they manufactured, particularly wheelbarrows. You could buy a Book wheelbarrow at Sears and Roebuck, and it didn't say A. Book and Sons, it was Sears Roebuck, but they manufactured for a lot of big department store type things. If we can jump ahead here. Okay, the building here is the original Book Foundry and Book Farm Implement Works. This building actually sat right next to Emerald Nursing Home, if you know where that is downtown. This sat between that building and I guess it's College Avenue right next to it. This actually burnt in, I think, the late 1800s, and it was replaced by a brick building. And then later, it was moved out to across from where the Taco Bell is now. But anyway, this was the original Book building on South Market Street. Okay, another business that started after that was Klein Chocolate. Klein Chocolate was one of the, again, small company that started in E-Town. It actually started in this building, which is no longer standing, but that is where the Taco Bell is today. If you're familiar with where Taco Bell is, that's where that building stood. It was built as the Lancaster Scale Works, and they went bankrupt. And Bill Klein, who worked for Milton Hershey, left Milton Hershey. He and his brother, actually he and two brothers, started their own business in Elizabethtown in 1913, and that's the building they occupied. That also later became Garber Motor Company. If you're familiar with Garber Motors, some of the old timers might remember Garber. They took over that building and actually built another building next to it. And this building was here until I think it was raised for the Hardee's. There was a Hardee's restaurant there before Taco Bell. But anyway, that's where the Klein Chocolate Factory started in 1913. And it's a picture of their trucks, and I don't know if you can see, Klein not only had a plant in Elizabethtown, they also had offices and manufacturing in Philadelphia, which is what it says on the side of this one. And for a while they had one in Chicago. So they were marketing chocolate all over the country. In fact, they were at one time, I've heard some people say, well, they were larger than Hershey, but if they weren't larger, they were right up there with Milton Hershey's chocolate. And it was that way. They were a huge company from, I'd say their best years were 1913 to 1963. 1963, they had their 50th anniversary, and this company grew huge. I mean, well, when we get to it, I'll show you that picture. Back to there, okay. Klein grew huge by the late 1960s. And there is a story, I don't know if does anyone know or have heard the story about the Milky Way bar and Klein Chocolate? Does anybody know about that? It was an interesting story. And at first I didn't know if it was accurate, but it is it's very accurate. It is a true story. When Bill Klein was marketing his candy, there's two things he had. It says on the truck, it's the milkiest kind of milk chocolate. They made it with the milkiest kind of milk chocolate. The other thing was their slogan, and I don't have a picture of it here. Their slogan was, "Made in America's Milky Way." That was their slogan. So Frank Mars in 1920, who founded M&M Mars, Frank Mars went to Bill Klein and wanted to use that slogan or that name Milky Way. And Bill Klein and Frank Mars came to an agreement that he would allow Mars to use the name Milky Way. But Klein had to be guaranteed that they would be able to make the chocolate for it, because Frank Mars wasn't actually manufacturing chocolate yet. They were, or at least not on any kind of a scale that they needed. So they came to that agreement. Bill gave Frank Mars the rights to Milky Way, and Frank Mars agreed that Klein would make the chocolate for that bar, which they did up until like 1968 or 69. So any Milky Way that was made by M&M Mars, or Mars at that time, was manufactured in Elizabethtown. They actually did the Milky Way bar. So in the late 60s, and that's the reason why we are now M&M Mars, they had a good relationship between the two companies. And in the late 60s, the chocolate business, the candy business in general, was more competitive. Klein was not doing quite as well as what they had been doing. And also at that time, Mars decided they were going to start manufacturing their own chocolate. So Klein, in effect, lost their biggest customer. That was really their largest contract. And when that happened, they were also at the point where the elder Bill Klein was gone. He had passed away. Bill Klein II was, I think, in his 70s. And the third generation, actually Bill Klein III, was not interested in taking over the business. So they had to make a decision. So they were going to sell. The choice was between Tasty Cake, which really wanted to buy Klein chocolate, or M&M Mars. And because of the relationship with Mars, it was sold to Mars. So that's the reason it went the way it did to M&M Mars. And they've been here since 1970, I think, is when that sale was made. So anyway, that is one of the, or a couple of the big businesses we've had. The other thing that I want to say too is about the growth of Elizabethtown. When you look at the early history, and I found this out when I was researching the history of the Lutheran Church, whenever you'd hear about, like for instance with the church, if anything was going on in the national level with the Lutheran Church in America or the national group, when they'd send pastors out, they wouldn't send them to Elizabethtown. We were like too far away. We were way up here. They were sending them to Middletown, Maytown, Bainbridge, Columbia, because that was, the river was, that's where the future was. And so it is interesting how we kind of got bypassed on some of the early, history in the region. But in the 1830s is when the railroad came to Elizabethtown, mid-1830s. And that's when things started to change a little bit, and Elizabethtown started to grow. So it was really had a lot to do with the railroads. Also let me see if I can. Okay, there's my railroad picture. Excuse me. This is the Elizabethtown train station in 1915. I don't know if you can see. This is way down here. You see the train station we use today down here. West High Street is right here, and this train station was actually, as you're going out West High, it would have been to the north side of West High. And this, the year, like I said, was 1915. The train station in the background here, and that was the old freight tower. That was built in 1915, so it hadn't yet opened. They were still using the old station. And the purpose of this picture is to show the Liberty Bell on its way to, I think, Chicago, stopped in Elizabethtown in 1915. And there's the train coming in, and everyone gathered around, and then a little cut to the top. I don't know if we can see that. You can see the Liberty Bell there. And I think in our archives here at the Heritage House, we have a banner, I believe, in the safe or something that advertised that or recognized that event. I don't know if it's around somewhere, but anyway, it was a big deal in town, and it did stop briefly in town for all the dignitaries to see this Liberty Bell, and then off it went. So I think it was actually July the 4th, I believe, 1915. The other thing I wanted to mention with the railroad too is it's not has nothing to do with this, but the Abraham Lincoln connections. Everyone know about Abraham Lincoln coming through Elizabethtown? When originally I was always told that, well, Lincoln went through E-Town twice, once on his way to Washington to be inaugurated, and then once on his way back after he was assassinated. And what actually happened is he did pass through here once, but on his trip from Illinois to Washington, he actually, when he got to Philadelphia, they went from Philadelphia straight to Baltimore, so he kind of bypassed E-Town. But on the way back, because the people at the state capitol wanted Lincoln's body to go through Harrisburg, not just go through, they wanted it to stop. So in the trip from Washington back to Illinois for his burial, he did go through, on his way to Harrisburg, did come through Elizabethtown. He didn't stop, but there are stories in the paper, and there is a book I just saw not too long ago, where it did mention how the churches, when the train would go through each town, it would, they'd blow the whistle, and that the church bells supposedly would ring as the train passed through. So Abraham Lincoln did pass through Elizabethtown, but it was also not on the tracks that you see today. The original train tracks for E-Town, when actually if you go up West High Street and you see where the railroad passes across at White Oak Mills, that was the original line that went through. And there was no elevated line like it is today. That was done in the 1890s, so it was all on grade. And if you follow that track as it goes through White Oak Mills, and of course it ends, but even if you look on a map, you can see the path that it took, and it lines up with David Abel's Lincoln train. And that was intentional. He actually bought the reproduced Lincoln train and had the tracks put back on the roadbed that was on his property. And it would actually swing where it currently does on his property, and it would connect back to the line that we have today. So those are our big railroad stories, the Liberty Bell and Abraham Lincoln. Any questions before we move on?
I'm at Masonic Village.
Yes.
And do I understand they brought the stone in to build Masonic Village, and they also built the train station with that stone?
Yeah, our train station was built in the 30s. And if you look at different train stations, a lot of those were built during the 1930s as part of the WPA era. And there are a lot of train stations that look just like ours, except they're built of brick. Ours is the only one that's built of stone. And I don't know, and Tom, I remember you talking about this one time, I think. I'm not sure how it came about, but it did have to do with the people in the post office, but also the Masonic Village, that they used the same Indiana limestone for that train station. So we're kind of unique in that era.
Ours is similar to Princeton, New Jersey.
Okay.
The same, the Pennsylvania Railroad drawings were the same for the two stations.
Okay. We go up to Hyannis on Cape Cod, and they have a post office. It looks identical, except it's brick. So we have one up on them.
One more comment.
Yes.
Many of the highest officials in the Pennsylvania Railroad, which was one of the biggest corporations in the world at that time,
Right.
were Masons. And when they knew the Masonic Village was being built, they said, even though that station you have pictured there was perfectly satisfactory, they said, we're going to need a better station there. That's how.
Right. Yeah. The one that you see pictured here in the foreground, was not that old. That was the third station that was built in town, and it really wasn't that old. I think it was built around somewhere between 1900 and 1905 or something like that. It was not an old station when it was decommissioned. If you go by there now, when you go on West High, when you go through the underpass, if you look off to your right, you can see very clearly that there's a big wide grass area, and that's where the station used to stand. Okay, let's see what we got here.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes,
Was that the Liberty Bill from Philadelphia?
yes.
Yeah.
And they moved it even though it was cracked?
Excuse me. Yeah, they took it. It was for the World's Fair that year, if I'm not mistaken, but it did a whole route, I guess, cross country. I'm not sure, but that was it. In fact, was it Jake, one of the Oweilers who was very prominent in town, I think he was a Burgess at the time, was involved in somehow getting the Liberty Bell to stop in E-Town. To stop in a small town like this was unusual. Yeah, it typically stopped in Lancaster, it stopped in Harrisburg. Most of the towns it would, slow down and it would go through town, but it wouldn't stop.
Yeah, the story was a few 100,000 school children wrote letters, this was before we were in World War I, to get the Liberty Bell to be seen, and because of that, it moved out to Seattle and back and never moved again.
While there's a pause, there's another piece of history. If you go to Valley Forge, and there's a display in there of the Liberty Bell moving at the same time, and it was not the Liberty Bell, it was another Liberty Bell. And this was the same size and everything, but it was the women making political statements to vote.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna jump along here. And that's really not the picture I was hoping to see right there. Okay, I did want to talk about some of the buildings downtown and how things have changed over the years. The building you're looking at there, as E-Town grew, I'd say in the late 1880s, things really started to grow. The town started to expand, but the square, most of the buildings that are in the square, even those today, date back to the very early 1800s, some late 1700s, but some of them you can't tell. This building is, in my day, and those who have been around for a while, remember Zarfos Hardware? Anybody remember Zarfos? This is where Zarfos Hardware was, and these two buildings are still there today. But when you look at them today, that's what it looks like. And you can tell when you look to from the center to the right, there's 4 windows on each floor, and then you look from the center to the left, you see the 3 windows on each floor. And you can kind of see that's that building. They took the roof off the one, they built the other one up. And that was in the day, I think that was done in the very early 60s. When to modernize, that's what everybody did. The 2 most prosperous businesses in town in the 50s and 60s were Zarfos Hardware and David Martin's on the opposite corner. And you look at those buildings today, they're both kind of like a nondescript box. Everything was, the architecture was taken away and they became boxes. The building to the left there, it says Oric above it. That was John Oric. He was his nickname was Rummy Oric, but he was he brewed beer, and I think he distilled also. So there are still some bottles around with J.E. Oric, Elizabethtown. That was his little business he had running there. And after the Depression, he became a greengrocer. But there's still, you can find his bottles every now and then. You'll see a Johnny Oric bottle around. But anyway, that's what it looks like. Well, today it's of course not a hardware store. I think it's fuel. Gym, yeah, I think it's a gym, yeah. So, and this is the corner, right around the corner from that. This is where the Tatted Toy Guys are now, that building, if you're familiar. Originally, the door was, obviously, it was fronting on Market Street. And at some point, it was closed up and they moved it to the corner where it is today. It was when I was a young person, that was a grocery store. That was Grinder's grocery store. And this one, does anybody recognize where that is? Yep. Yeah, this is the library coffee shop, this building right here. This would be what was the Kennywood Hotel years ago. It was Funk's Brewing lately. Now it's, I think there is another restaurant bar going in there shortly. But, and then the library actually went from here to there. This was the original bank. And then George Boggs had his hardware store right beside it. Those two buildings were actually converted to that. Even though supposedly they didn't tear those buildings down completely, they just totally renovated those buildings and put on this facade. But that's when it was the bank downtown. And that was taken down, I think, in 2000, and the library was built. And if you go down there today, the only part of that building that's still there is this little piece right here. If you drive by and you look at the front of the bank, they couldn't, because of the way it was built up against the house next to it, they couldn't take that down. So that wall remained there. So when you drive by and you look up, you see that marble piece, and that's still part of the old bank that was left. So anyway, that is exactly where the library stands today. Yeah, this one is a shot of South Market Street looking toward the square, and all those buildings that you see they're still there currently. On the foreground to the right is the old firehouse that was built in 1885. It had two doors then, but it looks, other than the fact it was stuccoed up, so you don't see the brick anymore, it's pretty much the same. All the buildings across the street are the ones that are there today. And of course, we had the dirt street. That was before 1908. I'm not sure when it was taken, but in 1908 is when the trolley line went in town. So if you see a picture of Market Street, you see trolley lines, you know it's 1908 and after. And this one I wanted to point out, this is also a building on the square. It's still there. Anybody know which one this is? It's kind of deceiving. No, it is, well, the D.H. Martin is Shenanigans Bookstore. And beside him, he had D.H. Martin, he had a clothing store, and he also had a grocery store. And the grocery store was to the right, which is where the Oddities Museum is. After, I think he started in 1875 over here, and in 1906 he moved from that building, caddy corner across the square, to where Frugal Finds is now. That was the old David Martin store. Yeah, it's the other interesting things about the buildings on the square, they're all brick buildings, but if you look at them, almost, I think every one has been cleaned up. And in the 60s, they put chicken wire over everything, they stuccoed them, and put in fake brick. When you look at Folklore, Shenanigans, Zarfos, that building, they've all been covered in stucco brick, I guess is what they called it, because it looked much nicer and cleaner. And that is the other corner where David Martin moved to. This is where Frugal Finds is today. And if you look at the architecture, it's beautiful. All across the top, all that was torn down in 1954. The building is the same structure, But all the trim at the top, all the gingerbready stuff, it was all taken down. And if you look at it now, it's pretty much just a square box painted gray. Okay, yeah, this one was another one. Now it's showing the square looking toward, looking north. What you're looking at there is the old Greenewalt. It went by either Greenewalt House or the Greenewalt Hotel. That's the location where what was the Moose Lodge, which is now the Marriage Hub. That's the building that replaced it. This picture was taken in like 1880, I believe. Before it was torn down, it was remodeled, and you'll see pictures of it with a mansard roof. It looks pretty much different than what it does in this photo. But before it closed, when it closed in the late 1920, Bill Klein actually bought that property, and his plan was to it was going to be basically a place for his baseball team to stay when they weren't in there between games. If you know Bill Klein, Klein Chocolate had a baseball team. Of course, you know a lot about that. I think different people have kind of studied it, and I'm not sure who all. I don't know that much about the team, but I know that Bill Klein bought this property with the idea of making it kind of a hotel, but basically a place for his team to stay. That didn't pan out too well, and it got sold, and the Moose Lodge bought it and tore this building down. The interesting part is, if you ever have a chance to go in the Marriage Hub, and I don't know what parts are accessible now, but when this building was torn down, the foundation was still there. They built the Moose Lodge on top of the existing foundation. So when you go down there and you look in the basement, you go up, it's elevated, and you kind of have to duck. But the old foundation for this Washington Hotel is still there, and the lodge is actually built on that foundation.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
You said it was a baseball team?
Yeah.
Were they all white, or was it integrated? Were they black and white?
No, I don't think it was integrated. It was a lot of it started out with employees of the chocolate factory. But I think at some point it became its own entity, and if they could get ball players to play, they would sign who they could. But they would play major league teams in the off season at different times. They played, you'll hear stories about Babe Ruth. They played against the Red Sox and different teams. I know Babe Ruth pitched against them, but I don't think it was in town. I think it might have been Harrisburg or somewhere. Yeah, so anyway, they did play against Babe Ruth.
And they beat him.
Yes. Yes. Where are we at here? Okay. There we go. Does anybody remember this building in town? This was a beautiful building that was torn down. Does everybody remembers this? This is another case where I've always said that most of the really historic buildings, and not just historic buildings, but some of the real nice buildings in town, have been torn down by churches. And even though I'm very much a church person, this was torn down by the Roman Catholic Church. This is actually where, if you go down Market Street and you look back and you see the Roman Catholic Church sitting in the alley, this was on Market Street in front of that. And that's just the way it was. And it wasn't just that, it was churches needed parking. And so if there was a building came up for sale close to where your church was, if you could get it, they got it. This was actually the Oddfellows building. E-Town had a very strong Oddfellows lodge from, I think, 1846. And I'm not sure when they disbanded, but they were a very strong lodge up through the years, well into the 1900s. Before this was the Oddfellows building. The portion to the left, I'm not sure exactly where, somewhere in here, this was a separate building. And then that was also a separate building. That was actually another old hotel or tavern in Elizabethtown. It's called the Washington House for a time. And at some point when the Oddfellows Lodge bought the property, it was renovated, made again to look as one building. And it was torn down. And I think, I'm not sure if it's still there or not, there was a date stone in the front wall of that building. And after they tore it down, that date stone was put in the ground right where the corner of the building was. And I haven't walked down past there. I'm assuming it's still there, but there was a date stone in the ground there to mark that. So,
Hey, Phil,
yes,
was the library in that building for a short period of time?
that's where the library started. Yeah, E-Town Public Library started on the second floor of this building. Yeah, when I was a kid, this was the portion to the right was Risser Motors had a showroom there. They actually had their dealership was across the street in what was Hershey Wagner's plumbing shop. That's where their business was, but they had a showroom across the street, and I remember seeing cars sitting in that window when I was little. There we go. Anybody know where this building is?
Truist.
Yep, and buried under all that brick is this building. It was the same time period. This was 1964. This was built in 1917, and it was built by Huffer Brothers in town. And somewhere, I don't have a picture of it, but in my grandmother's photo album is a picture of this building when it still had the contractor sign out front with a horse and wagon making a delivery, and it was Huffer Brothers. Anyway, that's what it looked like. It was a beautiful building. And in 1964, for I think it was an anniversary of theirs, of the bank, they did what they did a lot in those days. They covered it in brick and turned it into a box. But it's under there. Actually, I think the marble you see around the foundation is the only part you can still tell is that building. So this is, I said earlier about Klein Chocolate starting out on Market Street. This, now it's been redone, but this is the original Klein Chocolate building from 1913. They built a stepped parapet wall, I guess you call that. But behind that is the original Klein Chocolate. And then they also built a building next to it. And then when I was growing up, they connected the two in the front. So they had this modern looking building, but it was actually the old Klein Chocolate building and the other block building. This was taken in 1926 for the, what was that? For the anniversary of the 200th anniversary, wait, yeah. So it was one of the floats they had in the parade at that time. Okay.
A question.
Yes.
When you've been talking about during the 1960s, it seems like that's when a lot of the buildings were covered over. Was there a reason that they decided to cover them over with brick?
It was just, I think, just the history wasn't. Apparently, they didn't look at it like we look at it today. It was strictly just to modernize. Like you wanted to be modern, a modern building. That was an old-fashioned looking marble structure. So, and it wasn't just E-Town. You can see it at different places, but particularly here, some of the nicest old Georgian-looking buildings and different architectural styles were just covered over. It was cheaper than tearing it down and starting over, so you got a brand new looking building by, making it look modern. No, like I said, the two down on the square, David Martin's and Zarfos Hardware, those were the ones that could afford to do that. They were the most prosperous businesses we had, I think, downtown. So now looking back, it's probably, at the time it was a great thing. Now I'm not so sure. Does anybody know where that picture is taken?
Is that Peach Alley?
Yes, it's Peach Alley Court before Poplar Street was paved. If you look, Poplar Street is in the foreground, right, coming down across there. That was built as A.S. Kreider Shoe Factory. And when I was a kid, it was Kreider Shoe Factory. Empire Shoe also had a portion of that building. There was more than one business in there. That was built as a two-story building, and you'll see pictures. I don't think I have any on here, but you'll see pictures of it as a two-story, and then you'll see somewhere it's a two-story with half a third story. So it was built as business grew, and as it was needed, they added on to the building. So you look at it now, and it's obviously this big three-story building, which is now apartments. Okay, this is just a shot showing the trolley tracks down through town. This was 1917, I think it says, yep. And you can see, we've seen this picture before, or different views. You can see the bank, the big three-story building on the right. David Martin, I think we did see that one, right? I believe. Do we have any more there?
I think that's all we have.
Was the trolley horse-drawn, or was it?
No, it was
Motor?
murder, yeah. The trolley tracks went in E-Town in 1908 through, I think, 1932, I believe it was. And that went from Lancaster up through Mountjoy. It actually came up through Reams. When the trolley was put in, Market Street didn't go down the way it does now. It would veer off on Anchor Road, and it would take, Anchor Road was actually the 230. It went down through the underpass and then down through Reams. And that's the way the trolley came up through. If you look, when you go down that way, I'm trying to think as you're going down on the right-hand side, it's across from, there's a E-Town Auto, I think it's called, it's an auto repair shop. And there's a farmhouse right across the street. In that front yard of that is a little stream running through there. There's a concrete bridge over it. That's the old trolley. That was the trolley bridge going down through there. So you can, I'm sure it's still there.
Bill,
Yes.
I wanted to make a comment. My family burial plot is at Mount Tunnel in the front row. And so Kimmel and I wanted to buy a few more burial plots. And they said, well, we can't go down too far with yours because the trolley track is still there.
Yeah,
It's still there.
yeah. The trolley went from the square, or going that way, it went from the square out Market Street and up, and when it got to past Maytown Road, it started to veer off a little bit, and it went right through, I think right where the Veterans Monument is out front, when you're looking at the cemetery to the left, it went out through there. And again, I think if you look on a Google map, you can kind of picture where it would have gone. But yeah, it went down behind the hatchery and all the way down and through. But you're probably right, it may still be there. And then the other trolley we had was the Hershey trolley, which went also from the square. It didn't connect, but it stopped in front of the Moose Building now, the old Greenwald Hotel. And it went out up Market Street, and when it got to Linden Avenue, it cut off. And I don't know the exact path, but it cut off there, and it picked up on the top of Hanover Street and then went out. Actually, the Hershey Road that we have now was the old trolley road to Hershey. And what we call the old Hershey Road was, the one with all the dips and curves. That was the Hershey Road, and that's what it was. And when the trolley went out, and I'm not sure what year the trolleys for Hershey ran, but it was Milton Hershey who was a big part of that, using the Hershey trolley for milk pickup along the route. But anyway, so when you see the Hershey Road and you're traveling to Hershey, that's the original railroad bed for the trolley.
That trolley line would parallel Mill Road, between Mill Road and the school that's up there.
Okay.
Went through a little cut, And right after that, it turned to the east real hard. And out there before you got to what's now the Hershey Road, there was apparently a picnic site that the town people used.
Yeah,
There's some big rocks up there that have some very interesting carvings
really?
on them that the people left.
That was near the old VFW, right? Somewhere around there, or not? Oh, okay. Because I know there was a picnic ground out there somewhere. Huh. That'd be interesting to see.
The lady over here brought up about Mount Tunnel Cemetery. That's another railroad story you may care to share.
Oh, about the railroad cut? Yeah, and I'm not up on it a lot, but when the tracks went through, they used to call that, it was either Red Hill or Tunnel Hill. Well, later they called it Tunnel Hill, but when the railroad came through, it stopped basically right before it got to Mount Tunnel, right at that hill. And then it picked up again on the other side, like where Maytown Road, when you go up Maytown Road, as soon as you leave town, you go over the railroad bridge. That was at one time a tunnel through there. And train coming from Lancaster would stop at one side. They'd have to get out, go up one side and down the other and pick up another train on the other side of the tunnel or on the other side of the hill and make their way through. Then they did put a tunnel through, and I'm not sure what year the tunnel was put in, but it was a one track at that time. E-Town only had there was one line up until 1899, and that's when they put in the two, the tracks that we have today. But yeah, they did put the tunnel through, but that was, for years, they'd have rock slides and all kinds of issues. So that tunnel was finally caved in and widened, and now we have the bridge on Maytown Road, the bridge that goes over the tracks. But yeah, that was an excursion, I guess. So the other thing I wanted to bring up, and I don't have, apparently their slides didn't copy over. The other thing I want to talk about was E-Town's fire, and in 1892, we had our big fire, like most towns have a big fire or a big flood or whatever, but we had our big fire in 1892, which burnt from this building. Well, this is what was built after the fire, but there was a 3-story building that stood here. And again, this is where Frugal Finds is today. And it burnt from there down to trying to think what's in there now. I think Grove Flooring's in there. It used to be Hernathius Insurance Office. That building survived, but everything between there burned down. So everything from here to that last building was built after the fire of 1892. The interesting thing was the building that was saved, the one at the alley, was where Dr. Treichler, Abram C. Treichler, lived and had his doctor's office. And he was really the one, I think his was the only injury during the fire. He got burnt because he had singed his hair and he supposedly had burnt hands. He and some of the neighbors started the bucket brigade and constantly were pouring water on the roof and on the side of the house to keep it from spreading or catching fire. And on the other side of his house was an alley, and then there was a brick building there. But it was really because of not just him, but the neighbors that kept that house from actually catching fire. Is really what kind of stopped the fire in that time. You could talk probably for an hour just on the fire because there's a lot of neat things connected with that. How Lancaster Fire Company came up. This was in February of 1892. It was extremely cold and windy that night, and they called to Lancaster for help, and they called to Harrisburg for help. And Harrisburg showed up. Lancaster got here after the fire was out, and then the newspapers they went crazy with condemning Lancaster because they didn't get here, or didn't get here to help. But it's a neat story about what happened in those few hours during that night when the fire was. There was George Wagner had a shoe store on the corner here. It was actually his building that started the fire, where the fire started. George Wagner and his son, was George F. Wagner and George W. Wagner, I think it was, father and son. They were both left homeless. They lost everything in the fire. And years later, in 1956, if you know where the End Zone bar is on West Side, right next to it, there's a parking lot. Well, in 1956, there was a fire there. Almost the same circumstances as the fire in 1892. But the next generation, the grandson, who was also George Wagner, lost everything in that fire too. So it's like 3 generations, all the same name, all lost things in a fire. It's kind of eerie. So are there any, yes?
I just wanted to add, so I'm currently renting some spaces around this building, the Norton building. And one of the spaces I think is the most interesting in Elizabethtown. They surmise it could have been his shoot area or alterations area. It's on the 2nd floor, accessible through South Cherry, which is like right over here. But I have a secondhand women's clothing shop in it. I'm open tonight 6 to 8. If anyone ever wants to tour it, come out tonight or just follow me on Facebook, Kim Winey, if you want to see a little bit of history. It's very, very interesting.
That's behind this building here, right? Behind,
So this is 3 South Market Street.
Right.
And there's no entrance to my space from there.
Right.
You go behind P&J Pizza right over here, and you access it through the teal building.
yeah,
Very soon, this is not public knowledge, we're not looking, I'll be renting 5 South Market Street.
oh,
Yeah, so I'll have
Great.
that shop in there with a door and all that fun
Great.
stuff. So it's exciting to see pointing out all these historic places and
anyway,
living in them essentially now, so.
yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
I don't actually live in them, to be clear. And I'm there all the time.
She cracked it.
I basically do.
The other thing, while you bring that up, this, you see the little arched doorway here? If you go in to Frugal Finds and ask them if you can look in the closet, they have a closet inside there, and when you open that, you can see that arched doorway is still, like it's all closed off, but when you open it, it's like this doorway to nowhere, but to the past. It's really neat. You see this arched door, because obviously it looks nothing like that today. Yes.
Was there ever a newspaper in town?
Oh my, yeah. Yeah, we had, well, as far back as the 1850s at least, they had a newspaper. But in 1868, was it John Westhafer, I guess, came from Middletown. And there was a newspaper here in town that he and another man bought. And they renamed it, I think it was the Trumpet or something like that. They renamed it the Elizabethtown Chronicle. And the Chronicle ran from 1868 up to the fire, when all the records from the beginning to 1892 were burnt. So, but the paper continued. And it actually ran up into the 1970s. I think the Westhafer sold it in early 70s, I believe, because they had celebrated their 100th anniversary in 1968. And I think it was a couple years later that it got sold. And then it was one of those things that got sold and it got sold again until there was no more Chronicle. But the sad part is, well, in the fire in 1892, they lost everything before that. And then again, they're printing from 1892 up. And then in 1946, the Chronicle was actually located on South Market Street, across from where the Marriage Hub is. Down, the building that they were actually in, I think, has been torn down and it's been rebuilt. I think Groff Meats owns it now. But anyway, in the flood, they lost everything from 1892 up to 1946. And so that was gone. And then sometime in the late 60s, supposedly they put everything in the attic of that building, all the files. And they rented out an apartment on the 2nd floor. And the tenant in that apartment apparently had access to the attic and cleaned house one day, and they lost all those newspapers. So the Chronicle had no official history in print, but you can access from, I think, 1928 to 1978, I think it is. if you go to newspapers.com, some, I'm not sure where they came from, but somebody did have those files from 28 to 78. So you can get them online on newspapers.com. And every once in a while you'll see, I know the Historical Society has some old copies, and I don't know if the Heritage House does or not, but there's odds and ends around their old issues. But yeah, when we lost the paper, that was, it was big, because that was, it was in the days when newspaper was really a newspaper, and they covered everything, and not just E-Town, but it was, West Donegal and Mountjoy Township and the whole area, Anything else? Questions?
Are there any current ordinances in the borough that deal with historic preservation? Or anything that if somebody would buy a historic building, and are they
Yeah.
certain?
Sadly, the only ordinance that directly affects historic buildings is, it's good. There is, when someone applies for a demolition permit, if you want to tear down a building, it has to go through a process. You can't just tear it down. You can't just get a permit. But it takes the zoning officer or the codes officer to recognize that this is a historic building to start that process. But the process really is that the Historical Society, or actually the Heritage House, I think, is the first one on that protocol. And Tom Campbell, I know, knows some of this because it came into play when they tore down the old freight station out near the train station. But yeah, there is a process to, if they can't stop the demolition, to at least give people time to record the building. In pictures and whatever, but also possibly find either other buyers or other uses for it. So there is a process, but that's really the only thing. And right now we're dealing with the old Bear Tavern, and I think at some point, well, I'm sure that this has started other discussions about historic overlay districts, because right now we don't have that. And at one time, that was people who are into history want that kind of thing. But there's also a lot out there that don't want that. Obviously, people who are into buying properties and flipping them or whatever, they don't want to deal with that portion, of trying to save a historic building if they don't, or preserve it the way it is. So, but I think with the discussion with the Bear Tavern, some of that's going to happen. I think at some point, we will have a historic overlay district that will give a little more protection for some of these small town or small areas in town, especially not just the downtown, but some of the early streets like Poplar Street and Park Street, High Street, the streets that were some of the earliest ones in town. So I think there is hope there.
I moved to E-Town just recently, 6 years ago, and I'm amazed that there's so much history here, but it's being destroyed. And I came here from Westchester Borough, where I lived most of my adult life, and we had a historic commission, we had planning commission, we had ordinances, we had zoning changes, and everything had to be, the ordinances changed, and the overlay districts that you're talking about are really important.
Right.
Not just for historic, but for retail. You can see everybody complains, the stores in town come in and a year later they're out of business. There's so much turnover.
Right.
And, there's 5 vape shops and everything. And unless you zone against it or change ordinances, there won't be any discussion.
Right.
It's amazing to me that all these historic places are.
No, I get that.
It's not just here, it's a lot of history.
Yeah, no, I think in the next year or two, I think we'll see changes in E-Town like that. But I know when I was on Borough Council, I don't know if many remember, I forget what the name of the place was. It was Bad Boy Toys. Do you remember Bad Boy Toys in town? That was a mess, and it took forever they finally got it shut down. But what happens is these businesses come in, and what they apply for a permit is, I think Bad Boy Toys came in as a variety store. And then you try to challenge what they're coming in as. Well, by the law, maybe, yeah, that is a variety store. But it's, so then you got to wait till they actually break the law, which they did, and they would be shut down. But yeah, it's a problem. It is.
Our family has had a passionate challenge with that because maybe some of you know, we purchased my great-grandparents' home on High Street. He was a veterinarian in the 1900s. And we never wanted to be sold. We never wanted to be torn down. We're very passionate about her. And it's a challenge because we went to the lawyer, we went to the who wants it?
Right.
It's really, we would love to see some of those organizations come back strongly because there would be somebody to go to help you with that.
Right. And I think the Preservation Associates is stepping up a little bit. I know we're actually getting involved in the Bear Tavern to help find a solution to that, what could happen there. Because right before the borough bought the property, it was a, what would you call it, a secondhand store or, and that's so beneath what it should be. I mean, when you look at the history of that property and then you see what it was being used for, wasn't good, I don't think. So we do have a ways to go. I don't know, I think E-Town wasn't the best at preserving what we had in the past. I mean, I think we did some buildings that got torn down. I mean, it's a shame. You look at some of the pictures I showed. The old Black Horse Hotel, which, it was damaged in fire, could have been fixed, and restored. That was bought and torn down for a parking lot. I know up the street, the Lutheran Church tore down some, what I would call historic homes. St. Peter, most of the churches in town have done it, and it's not malicious. It's just you need parking, and that's what happened. And it's sad that, particularly things like the old Oddfellows building. I mean, on Market Street, that was just terrible to see that one go.
I think we're blessed to have you as mayor because you have a heart for this town, and that's where it begins.
Thank you. It takes the council and it takes the staff that really gets behind it, and that's kind of what we tried to do the other night. We had a meeting for the public up at the borough office concerning the tavern, and I was not surprised, but I was happy that we had turnout that we did. But it takes people in the community to really step up, and again, also the elected officials there. So hopefully, not just the Bear Tavern, but some of these other neighborhoods and buildings as we go down through, over the years, that we can start preserving some of the ones that need to be preserved. It's the hope. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we all learned something today.
With that, I hope you picked up a lot of information because Sunday at the Historical Society, there's a trivia luncheon. So if you go, I expect you all to get a prize. But thank you, Phil. That was good.
Thank you.
I really wanted to know, as a kid, did you go downtown a lot?
Yeah, I was going to say real quick, if you don't mind. When I grew up, I grew up in town. I lived mostly a block or two off of Market Street, and yeah, I had somebody tell me one time that, well, you grew up in a time that didn't exist. Like maybe in your head you think, but I did. I mean, it did exist for me and for kids that I grew up with, and for I think everybody. When you're young, it was the good old days. I mean, look back. Now, I look back at what my parents had to do at that same time, and it wasn't their good old days. I mean, they were fighting to make a living. my dad just got out of the Army. There's all kinds of, they could barely eke out a living, I think. So for them, yeah, it wasn't the good old days. But for us kids growing up in that time, I mean, it was. We used to, I grew up like hanging out on Market Street, like in the Lindemoose, in the drugstore. Just, we go in there and we'd sit at the bar and get a thing of water, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was fun growing up in town. And that was in the days when you went downtown because you had to go downtown. It wasn't like now. Now you have to have enough, something has to draw you down there. When I was a kid, and a lot of, the towns you grew up in, the grocery stores were downtown, the drugstore was downtown, the dry cleaner. I mean, I remember Saturday mornings we'd go to the grocery store and Mom would do the shopping and Dad would go over to the drugstore and then you'd end up at the shoe store or whatever. And so you went there because that's what you did. You had to do that. And you look back at that, I know we're never going to get to that, but it would be neat if there were things that you had to do downtown. So, yep.
Yes.
I grew up on South Market Street in the 50s, and I have often said to my children, I wish I could take you back in time for a day over Christmas,
Oh,
because there was nothing like E-Town at Christmas time. The stores were bustling with customers. People were walking in and out of the store. There were stores everywhere.
Yep.
I mean, there were all kinds of businesses, and everybody knew everybody. And so you were constantly stopping and talking to people. It was the most wonderful experience to grow up here. The only thing is, like, if I did anything naughty, I knew I better not, because by the time I got home, my mother knew.
yep. Yeah, I was the same way. And I remember Christmas, it's funny because those days, at Christmas, the lights went across Market Street. And just a couple weeks ago, we were talking at the office that because they put the new trees, they cut down all the trees because they were so overgrown, put in new trees. Well, it's not conducive to putting lights on those yet. So what are we going to do at Christmas? And one of the guys said, why don't we need to put lights across the street like we did, I think it was Jay Heinecker, if you know Jay Heinecker grew up in town. And right away, it's like, oh, we don't know if we can do that because if you put them on the poles, you got to get a hold of PP&L, and that's a process, and you don't want to put them on private property to build, because they used to go from building to building, and that's what you did. And now everything seems to be such a process, it's like, and it's always, the legalities, and you look back and think, did they go through all that then, or did they just do it? I don't know. But you're right, that's how E-Town, I remember, all the shopping was done in town. Shears Furniture Store was the kind of the go-to place.
Where the subs used to be in there, I think.
Yeah, where the old Subway was the old, they called it Shears Furniture Store. But
There were lots of places to buy toys. I know
yeah,
that.
they had a big toy department. Joe the Murderous Friend, yeah. Yeah, we were the typical small town, I think, back in the day, but.
And I have memories, very specific memories, like of that fire. When I was in first grade, we walked from West High. I went to school on High Street in elementary, and I remember being terrified to go by and looking at those burned out buildings all along there. It was very, very scary. And going to the library. Now, I was allowed to walk from past Dr. Barr's the whole way up to the library by myself. But the scary thing was not crossing the street, but inside that building, there was an iron lung. Why, I don't know. But just walking past that iron lung, and we used to go to the Crippled Children's Hospital, so I would see children in that.
Yep.
We would sing with brownies or Girl Scouts or whatever, we would go and sing to them. And, things like that are very, very clear, like it was just the other day. But there's so many memories here, and there's so many wonderful, wonderful memories.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. The one thing, it's like going on forever. But as a kid, where Hershey and Wagner had their plumbing shop downtown, which was, I don't know if you know exactly where that is. I'm not sure what's in there now. But to advertise when they were doing hot air furnaces, to advertise the furnace, they had a furnace inside, and it was over the winter. I don't know how many years they did it, but it would sit inside, and they had a piece of duct coming out, I guess above the door somehow, and it would just blow warm air down. And you would walk by and you stop there to get warmed up. I still remember doing that. So, well, thank you.
Well, thank
For
you,
everything.
Bill. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Next Wednesday is our last program in our series.